Yes, it's challenging. It's the last day. It's after lunch, and it's beautiful outside. So I suspect people prefer the sea ahead than the road ahead. But I'll try to make sure you don't have the feeling you've wasted your time coming here. So thank you very much for inviting me. Obviously, I'm both honored and excited to discuss the road ahead at an interesting time, to say the least. It's one of these moments where you don't really know where the glass is half full, and it seems that the mood is kind of half full, or if it's half empty. It's one of these moments where things go very fast. I don't dare saying it's like Montagne Russe because it's not the name of the game today. Let's call it roller coaster. The BIS, in Basel, the central banks of central banks, published a report last year saying this was the shortest and fastest economic sequence ever recorded by economic history. In 2019, it was extremely bullish. Early 2020, with the COVID, we collapsed. Then, with the whatever it takes, it rebounded. 2021 was the best year ever. So people started to see, oh, we are back to the roaring 20s. Then the war in Ukraine, and suddenly, in the space of 1 month, we moved from the roaring 20s to the depressing 30s. And now we're kind of, where are we? And we have the feeling that we've been through the worst, that finally the war seems manageable, that the central banks kind of understand where we are, that China is kind of reopening. So it's not great, but it's not that bad. This being said, you might remember what Warren Buffett said in 2008. It's when the tide goes down that you see who is swimming with a swimsuit. I don't think we've totally stress tested the Warren Buffett theorem for this cycle, so we'll see. So there are many things I would like to discuss with you when we discuss the road ahead. There are many mitigants to that. First, I'm relatively new to the private world. I've spent most of my career, you hinted at that. I've been group CFO of Crédit Agricole and Société Générale and number 2 of the World Bank, so more on the macro side. And I've started in the private business 6 years ago with the creation of Blue Like an Orange Sustainable Capital. So I don't feel as legitimate as most of you to discuss the road ahead. I don't want also to exhaust your patience, and I know the time constraints. But I'd like to focus on 2 uncertain and crucial issues, which are actually very crucial to what I've chosen to do 6 years ago when I left the World Bank and decided, in a way, to join your group. The first one is impact. And the second is emerging and developing economies. First, on impact. I think we've come a long way on this, on sustainability, let me put it this way, but we are far from being there yet. I don't think we've reached the point of non-return. A little bit of history. The system in which we operate today crystallized in the early 70s. I mean, this is in particular the famous article from Milton Friedman in the New York Times on the 13th of September 1970, when asked to answer the question on whether General Motors should open its board to representatives of the public interest, he said, no way, public interest doesn't belong to the corporate world, public interest is somewhere else. He did not deny that there was a public interest, but he said it's not part of the business. The social purpose of business, as everybody knows, is to increase its profits. So profit is an end to an end. That's really at the heart of the system. The second signal was sent a few months later by Richard Nixon when he made the decision to suspend the convertibility of dollar into gold. So not only did he change the monetary system, but we moved from a system which was organized, gold, dollar, the IMF as a policeman, and the whole system was organized, to a system where the market is driving the values. What is the value of a dollar today? It's worth X euro, and what is the value of a euro? It's worth Y dollar, and it's moving every day. So we've moved from a system where the purpose is to increase the profits in a system where the market is the value, is a default value setter. And that's what has been called basically the mark-to-market system. I've been CFO for many years, and I know the type of discipline it brings to you. And I believe that it's now time to move from the mark-to-market to what I've called, probably a little rapidly, the mark-to-planet. So we are still very much in the same system today, but we had a moment of reflection in 2015. In 2015, we had a series of conferences. So I know most people don't pay attention to big conferences, but still, of course, the most well-known is Paris, the Paris Accord on Climate in December 2015. A few months before, in New York, you had the adoption by the UN of the Sustainable Development Goals that the pins have here. And a few months before, even less known, it's in Ethiopia, the adoption of the Partnership for Development. So that year, all countries, and the US are back now, agreed to a new roadmap for economy, sustainable, resilient, and inclusive. So that was a positive point. The negative point is we did not discuss how much it would cost and whether our system would be fit for purpose. And that's really what was the big missing point. So we made the collective bet that the invisible hand would make its way. That once we have agreed on the objectives, the market will follow. And basically, we sold the principle that it's just about a transition, and we still use the word transition. Transition is not very aggressive. I mean, transition is moving from one side of the beach to the other side of the beach, and people told you, I mean, you reallocate 2% of the money every year, and you decrease your carbon emission by 2% every year, and believe it or not, in 30 years, you're done, and you even did not pay attention. That was the kind of subtitle we got in 2015. It's going to be okay. And then people started to realize that 2% actually is a big, big, big shift. I mean, as we've seen with COVID. And the fact that people kind of, and we had the same thing with Mark Carney in Glasgow last year. So there is $130 trillion which are committed to climate. I mean, we all know it's not true. It's nice to see that the people behind $130 trillion are committed to do something. Doesn't mean that this $130 trillion will go in that direction. So there is obviously money available. We know that, although it's probably more difficult these days. But it's not just moving it around on paper that will make a difference. So today, 7 years later, or 8 years later, there have been some progress. I don't want to say that nothing happened, but we are not there yet. And basically why? Because our operating system is still the same. The fault lines that have been very visible through the global financial crisis are still there. As managing director of the World Bank, I was member of the Financial Stability Board, so I see what we've done and not done to repair the system. What have we done? We've patched up the system. We've changed the capital ratio, the liquidity ratio. We push compliance and risk to a more prominent role. I mean, you know all of this by heart. But we did not really address the underlying questions behind the system. So that's really very much unchanged. On top of that, and that's a big issue, the selfishness has increased. And it was very visible at the beginning of the COVID. You remember when people were fighting on tarmacs to get the mask, etc. So when there is a crisis, it's everybody for oneself. And you see in the international community, the fragmentation is there. At the beginning of the COVID, the World Bank and the UN say we need to mobilize 2 trillion for the developing world. The G20 convene and they say we propose to have a $15 billion temporary suspension of interest payment. 2 trillion, 15 billion. That's the reality. We are in a system where inequalities are growing. We are in a system where the environmental concerns are growing, and we've seen that at COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh and COP15 in Montreal. So the picture is still grim. On top of that, and we see that in our firm, there is, in particular, I would say with the young generation and our kids in particular, the questions of, does this make sense? Why do I work? I mean, there are big questions which we have to address. I mean, I've had surrealist question with people I wanted to recruit to say, yes, I'd like to work for you, but I want to work 4 days a week from home, and I'd like to work part-time on this NGO, etc. But yes, I'm happy to work half a day with you for a full time. I said, no. So this is really something which we are not accustomed to. And when my daughter, who is studying in California, came back for Christmas and said, Daddy, I have a problem with you. I say, what? He said, you are representative of patriarchal capitalism. I say, wow, that's tough. So that's the context in which we're operating. So there is a growing understanding that we are not in a business as usual period, while we are still in a business as usual period. So there are tensions. And the big difference between now and what happened in the 70s and 80s is that there is no master of the world. There is no Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher. There is no Milton Friedman to tell us we have to switch from one model to the other. there is nobody who will tell you we move from mark to market to mark to planet. So you have academics which are proposing things. I like to quote Colin Mayer, who was a former dean of the Oxford Business School, who say we have to move from the social purpose of business is to increase its profits, an end to an end, to the social purpose of business is to find profitable solution to the problem of this planet and its people. Doesn't say that profit is bad. Profit is a necessity, but profit is legitimate because it provides solution. And that's a big shift. So is it just wishful thinking? Is it possible? So today people would argue that we have ESG. I mean, we all know, we have all filled thousands of pages of ESG questionnaire. Sometimes we feel better, sometimes we feel worse. So the good news is that at least people are talking about it. It's socializing a number of issues. It's disseminating a number of questions. It's raising awareness. So I don't want to throw the baby with the water. But let's face it. ESG is very much aspirational. There are zillions of approaches, ESG models, etc. Every day brings a new one. Every company is making its own soup. We lose sight of what we are looking for. When you're being asked on a due diligence whether the company is recycling the cans or whatever, I say, okay, that's great, but do they do the right thing on the other side? So we tend to create a bureaucratic monster, which is, of course, raising suspicion everywhere. And it's raising actually concerns everywhere. So on the one hand, the companies say, I mean, I'm overwhelmed by what is being asked. The large corporate ask me when I'm a supplier to do this, and I just have no time to read this. The clients say, I don't trust this. In the US, you have 1,500 companies which are being sued for climate inaction and 1,500 companies which are being sued for too much climate action. The Republican Party say ESG is woke capitalism. In Europe and elsewhere, people understand that ESG is nice but will not make the trick. That the reality, we're not talking about a transition, the reality is a transformation. It's not cosmetics. And you remember maybe the cover page of The Economist last July, we say ESG, these 3 letters, will not save the world. So we'll see that there is a real tension. So again, it's moving, but we are not there yet. That's why I'm preaching maybe for my own parish, as we say in French. I think we have to go beyond ESG. We have to go to what is called impact, and there might be better words. Impact is about additionality. Do I make a difference with my investment? Intentionality, not aspirationality. I have the intention to do that, and I'm ready to risk myself and to be audited and controlled against my intention. Measurability. Of course, it's easier said than done, and I'm doing this every day, and it's very tough. It's very rare that a company is obviously impactful or obviously unimpactful. In reality, there are 50 shades of impact, and you have to take up your responsibility. In particular, because the financial industry, it's still very much based on what has been put together in the 1950s in Chicago, the risk-return equilibrium. As long as we don't change that and we don't incorporate a touch of impact or sustainability in the risk-return model, it's unlikely we will change much. And again, there is no master of the world. So in the US, it's likely to be discussed in court. In China, it's likely not to be discussed. And in the EU, of course, we do what we can do, regulation. SFDR, CSDR, etc., which on the one hand is okay. I mean, I've written many books to say we need to put standards, we need to get organized, we need to put this together. On the other hand, let's face it, it's risky. It's risky. We might create a bureaucratic monster. It might be too photographic. You're good or bad at a given moment, but you don't value the transition or the transformation. And as I said, you lose sight of the big picture. And on top of that, there are conflicts, as you know, between EFRAG and ISSB, IFRS, ISSB, to take one. But so it's a complex moment. And that's why I believe that the private markets, that all of us, we have the keys to this new world. I think we are, given the relationship we have with LPs and the relationship we have, the companies in which we invest, etc., we can do something. We have a particular responsibility. And I really, if I may say, believe that we can transform finance. I wrote a book which was a little provocative where I say, can finance save the world? I've discussed this book all over the world, and I must say, except in rooms like this, everywhere in the world, the reaction is that there is no way finance can save the world. If at least finance can stop ruining the world, that would be a good first step. So let's face it, we don't have a good reputation. So the point is, I don't want us to be trapped in, okay, let's do a little bit of impact on one end, or let's do a little bit of sustainability on the other end. If you agree that there is an impact finance, you tend to agree that there is an unimpactful finance. If you say there is sustainable finance, you kind of recognize that there is an unsustainable finance, etc. So for me, the real thing is really to transform finance, and it will take years. It's not overnight. I mean, as I often say, how do you say grand soir in English? You say grand soir. The French tend to say, yes, let's take the Bastille and we are done. No, these things are boring and takes time, but we have to transform finance from inside. And that's where I believe we can make a difference. We can make this transformation mainstream. Again, as I say, I don't buy the idea that there is a sustainable finance and unsustainable finance. It's really about redefining what we do. So, as I say, it's boring because it's discussing things. Once I met with the Minister of Finance, he said, I can't go to the news at 8 p.m. and explain to French people that we need to discuss accounting standards or fiduciary duties. I mean, that's probably true. But this is at the heart of what we are discussing. So accounting standards, governance, fiduciary duties, prudential regulation, valuation metrics, etc. That's really the name of them. If we don't do that, as I said when I was a CFO, during 2 months and 29 days, you can do whatever you want, but on the 30th day of the 3rd month, IFRS strikes back. And so you have very little flexibility. So it's a long road ahead. There won't be any grand soir. It's a lot of continuous work, determining work, but I believe that together we can test it. And that's really what I would like to call today, that impact becomes more and more mainstream. Again, there are trials and errors, etc. That's absolutely fine. But this is for me one of the way forward, a way not only to do good business, but also to rehabilitate finance in today's world and give it a positive role. Which leads me to my second topic, which is even probably more at the periphery of your thinking today, which is what do we do with emerging and developing economies? The vast majority, and I've made a kind of a random poll this morning about the areas where people are investing, is mostly France and Europe, a little bit the US or Israel, or you move around, but very little actually in emerging economies. Whereas the commitments we made in 2015 around sustainability, around climate, were global. The global GDP is $100 trillion, 50 trillion in advanced economy, 50 trillion in emerging and developing economies. My conviction, which I really grew when I was discussing this topic 7 years ago, is that the various battles we have ahead of us will not be won or lost in Brussels, in Washington, or Paris, or Cannes. The battle for climate, the battle for biodiversity, the battle for gender, and I can make a long list of all this, the battle against the pandemic, etc., will be won or lost in Bogota, in Brasilia, in Lagos, in Cairo, and in Delhi. And that's precisely not where we are making the effort. And that's, again, if I come back to Voltaire, some of you might have read this when they were in high school, in Candide, at the end of Candide, so the hero is traveling all over the world, a lot of adventures. It's a miserable journey, actually. He arrives in the Bosphorus with his dilapidated girlfriend. Say, here we are, now we have to cultivate our garden. And that's, unfortunately, the way people read the world today. I want to cultivate my garden, but the problem is that they read the garden as their ring-fenced backyard. So I'm taking care of my company, my family, my village, my parish, whatever, and if everybody does that, the world is going to be okay. The problem is that it's not working this way. Most of the challenges we have ahead of us are not local challenges. They are planetary, not global, but planetary challenges. And I believe that Voltaire, when he meant garden, meant not only your garden, but the planet. Our global garden. And it's like the end of the month and the end of the world that was famous with the Gilets jaunes in French. I think we have to work both with our garden and our planet. And that's where we have to that's where we have to innovate. That's where we need to make a difference. And that's where I believe, of course, that we collectively can do more. Of course, it's risky. Of course, it's difficult. But I really believe that it's a place where we can make a difference, that there is a collective responsibility. It was deeply felt at COP27. where, I mean, it leads to the creation of a new fund. I mean, most people were amazed that we created another fund on climate called Fund for Loss and Damages, which was a way for the Western world to recognize that they were responsible for climate, and they would have to compensate the South for that. So the fund is created. Of course, there is no money yet. But my conviction is that besides this agitation, the emerging market is a place where you can do good and well. That's my experience with Blue Like an Orange. It's not about being humanitarian. It's not about being philanthropic. I mean, every week I have a guy say, oh, my nephew is doing a great humanitarian project in Africa. Can you help him? I say, I'm very happy to help him, but my business is not humanitarian. I'm investing. Ah, okay. So when you say impact in emerging markets, people see it seems that I'm an NGO. I'm not. And so it's about real business. But I know perception matters. I had this discussion at the gala dinner yesterday with my neighbor. I said, oh my God, you invest in these countries, they are very difficult. And that's why it's important to engage public and private actors. It's important to discuss regulation and rules. It's important to discuss the reality of the risk. There is a perception, there is a reality, which everybody which has done this job knows. And what I want to avoid is basically to avoid, on the one hand, let's say, okay, we do impact in Africa, but it's a low-cost impact. It's a, impact for the dummies. I mean, and we have the real impact in the 8th arrondissement in Paris. No, impact works for everybody. We have to really have this common approach. So we don't have to be lax. We have to be demanding, but we have to recognize that not everybody is at the same level. And it's very interesting to see that President Macron, we'll see how it goes, but he has announced and confirmed that he will convene a big summit in Paris this June to discuss how to discuss a new financial deal with the South. Because he felt like others that there was a real tension, which was felt during the vote on Ukraine. I mean, people have seen that most of Africa and Latin America either abstained or did not participate. That I met recently with a former Prime Minister of Africa. He said, you have a problem with China. You have a problem with Russia. I don't. I have a problem with my country. What can you do to help my country? So that's where I am today. I want to support that effort. I'm not certain of the result, but I think our industry has to take full responsibility to mobilize private money where it's most needed on Earth. That's where I think impact can make a difference. I know it's still going to be marginal. I mean, I'm not naive. But I think by pushing a little bit, by demonstrating that this is where you can make a difference, you will make a difference. Let's face it, and one of the critical, probably the most critical question that as a world we have to face today, will we be capable to see Africa having a sustainable development in the 21st century? 1.5 billion people today, 2.5 billion in 2050, possibly 4 billion by the end of the century. Can we together, it's not us lecturing Africa, it's us together, can we together build a development for Africa which is profitable, resilient, inclusive, and sustainable? And let's face it, if we can't, I mean, our debate on migration, etc., will appear meaningless. So that's really where we are today. I think, and when I was in America, you have the same question with Latin America, even if the demographics is not the same. So I believe that to see, even at the margin at the beginning and then at a bigger perspective, at a bigger scale, we can really come together and do something in the South. I hope that the June summit will provide preliminary answers. I urge all of you to consider this in your business or privately, but I think that impact in emerging markets is one of the key to the 21st century. Thank you very much.
Any questions for Bertrand while he's here?
Hi, Bertrand. Thank you for that inspiring lecture. My name is Tucci, and there was something you mentioned about the financial system not being able to really accelerate impact agendas. And my question is, what part of the financial system do you think can really act as micro stewards? So macro stewards, like
Okay.
stewardship, for this crucial task that we have around like climate and global warming. Do you think it's the investors? Do you think it's the insurance companies? Because understandably, they're competing interests, right, across all the stakeholders, and I think that's really what brings the tension. So from your expertise and from your reflections, what agency do you think, as part of the financial system, what agency do you think is best positioned to champion macro stewardship for ESG and climate-related challenges?
So I think first that we collectively, as a private equity, private debt world, have a particular responsibility because we are at the crossroads of many. I think insurance companies also have a particular role, both on the asset and liability side, actually. That's really what makes them different. So I think that's why they are kind of more committed. Let me share an anecdote with you. It was very interesting. In 2015, so I was at the World Bank. We were instructed by the G20 held in Australia in 2014 at the Financial Stability Board, then chaired by Mark Carney, to discuss the impact of climate on financial sustainability. And so, since we are good soldiers, 6 months later, we had a meeting in London chaired by Mark Carney. So Mark asked me for the World Bank to explain why climate was so pressing, and then asked Bruno Bézard, some of you might know him, he was head of treasury at that time, because it was the Paris COP, so to speak about of France and say why COP is important. And then Mark opened the door to discussion. And there was a big silence, July 2015. And then after like 20 or 30 seconds of deep silence, one of the guys say, okay, Mark, okay, we have been asked to discuss, there is nothing, we have nothing to do with financial stability. Okay, you can tick the box, it's done. I mean, I was shocked. I mean, this was a big country. It was not a tiny country. And Carney say, okay, guys, you didn't get me. We have been asked to discuss. We'll have a real conversation. You're not ready. Let's convene again in September. So fast forward, September 2015, same people in London. And this time, Mark convened reinsurance companies, insurance companies, etc. And they all say, we have a problem now. It's a question of financial stability. And that's when, you might remember, he made a speech at the Lloyd's, where he called the tragedy of the horizons, where he said climate is about macro risk for financial stability. First is a physical risk, I mean natural catastrophe, etc. Second is a liability risk. And third is a transition risk. And that's where basically that moves the industry to move closer to. But that's where we're coming from. So it's a very long way. But I think insurance companies have a particular role. It's more complex for banks. Because banks, universal banks, by construction, they cover the whole spectrum of the economy. And they are stuck at a place where basically the government says the financial system should do this and this, while the government does not take responsibility. So you should not finance oil. But the government doesn't say anything about oil, for instance. And so it's not easy for banks. So they are, I mean, again, I don't want to be an advocate for the system, but so I think everybody has more or less flexibility, and I believe that we have more flexibility because of who we are, the type of specialty we can take, the type of responsibility we can have, etc. That's why I was very excited to discuss that with you today. I think it's essential that we bring this home. Doesn't mean that we will change overnight, but that's really something that could make a difference in the coming years. Sorry, it's too long.
Thank you. All right, thank you very much, Bertrand.
Thank you.